Welcome to the Rock and Roll Show podcast. We're here to share the thrill of experiencing live music together with strangers and friends and to get to know our guests a little bit better through their concert experiences. I'm your host, Alex Gadd, and I find that I relate best to people when talking about music. Finding out what bands they're into and what shows they've been to allows us to get to know one another and understand one another better. Also, hey, it's just fun to swap stories about shows we've seen over the years. Today, we've got a good one for you. We'll be talking with Rod Drysdale of Drysdale Wealth Management. Rod's one of my oldest friends. He's a huge music fan, and he's a pretty good drummer as well. We played together just over a decade ago in a cover band, the mighty Les Nessman. We've seen many rock and roll shows together, and we'll get into all of that. So please welcome Rod to the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Al.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. Good. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. Couple things to go over the shows that I can remember us going to together just in the last 4 or 5 years. We've seen 38 Special. You and Christine, your lovely wife, introduced me to the Zach Brown Band. We saw them at Citi Field. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band in 2016. We've seen Blackberry Smoke, and we saw John Petrucci at Town Hall in New York. So we've got to go see another show. It's been a while. But to start off, I'm really interested in how you got into music because you are a huge music fan. Was music something that was around your house?
It was. My parents, like I think a lot of us in our generation, there was always records playing, whether it was the Beatles, Peter, Paul and Mary, Neil Diamond, all of that stuff. I think my dad turned me on to Elton John. I think that was probably the first, besides the Beatles, when just playing those records till they were smooth, probably. Man, the first time they let me even touch that record player I was probably 6 or 7 years old. So we're talking 71, 72. But I gravitated to Elton John. I think that was the first real hook was Don't Shoot Me, I'm Ollie the Piano Player. And that album was Where Daniel Was, Elderberry Wine. There's some amazing. And then obviously went to the first Elton John record with Your Song and that stuff. So yeah, that's where it started. It was just in the house. There was always music playing in the house someplace.
And your folks were music fans, it sounds
like. They were. I think the first concert they went to was Clapton, and I think they were in their 70s when they went. So they weren't concert goers, but there was always music in the house.
And from that, how did it transition for you to becoming a musician yourself? Were you always tapping on something? How did you become a drummer?
I was a French horn player first. That's something I don't think we've ever talked about. When I was in middle school, I wanted to, the choices were cello, violin, or some kind of horn. And my older sister played the French horn, and she played all through high school in orchestra. And I was like, there's one in the house. We don't have to go rent another, a trumpet or something. And I started playing, and I played for a few years in middle school, and in band and orchestra, I was always drawn to the guys that were playing snare drums. And I was like, I like that. I think drumming is probably more interesting to me. And then I basically would set up pillows on my bed. I got some drumsticks. I had no drums. So I would play, get a good sweat going just in middle school. I think probably 6th grade, 7th grade, just playing in my bedroom on my bed, crashing into the pillows and stuff like that. And then in 7th grade, I started taking snare drum lessons. And then that was it. That's when it started. It was middle school.
So did you switch from French horn to playing percussion in the orchestra at school, or did you take drumming lessons outside of school?
I took drumming lessons outside of school. I think I went to a bunch of the snare drum guys were taking lessons from one particular drum teacher, and he was a Broadway show percussionist. He was at night. He was playing in shows in New York City, and during the day he gave lessons. And he was a snare drummer. He could play set, but his proficiency was snare drum. And so we started with rudimentary stuff and just tapping on blocks. I had a little practice pad and just doing all the left, right, left, 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 right, left paradiddles and all that stuff. And I was pretty bored with it really quick because I wanted to play a set. I wanted to go from tapping on this wood block in my bedroom to playing Madison Square Garden behind a huge rock band. So I dropped lessons pretty quick.
That sounds like a lot of people. I think that I read in the Dave Grohl Storytellers book that he started off playing on pillows in his bedroom too.
Yeah.
Um, it sounds to me like that's how it starts, is that you get the bug and then you just wanna
Yeah.
go. It was for me, I started playing guitar, obviously not drums, but the same thing. I
Yeah.
just started plunking out tunes and dreaming immediately, I wanna go and be on stage.
Yeah, it's funny. I filled up a sock with coin because I wanted to make the noise of a hi-hat. So I wanted something that made that kind of metallic noise. And then I would use like a notebook for the snare, just so it would pillows were the tom-toms and the cymbals, but I wanted to get a little bit more feel. So I started developing more of a bed drum set, which had a little bit more oomph to it till I finally until I finally got a small set.
So what was your first kit? What do you remember it?
Yeah, it was a small Ludwig kit. It had a bass drum, it had a floor tom, a bass drum, a snare, and a single mounted tom, a ride cymbal, and a hi-hat. That was it. It was 1, 2, 3, basically a 5-piece set, your basic set. I had a Gref snare drum, which, my God, I wish I still had that snare drum, man. But my drum teacher found it used, I think for, at the time, it was probably, I don't know, $100 for the whole thing. And I set it up in my bedroom and just started really annoying my family and next door neighbors. It
Sounds like the classic Ringo kit that you had.
was the Ringo kit.
Yeah. That's great. So let's now transition over to live music. So you started off listening to the Beatles, which I did too, and then
Mhm.
the easy listening parent rock or parent music.
Mhm.
For me, it was Barry Manilow, Peter, Paul, and Mary, as you mentioned.
Yep.
The same kinds of things that John Denver that my parents were listening
Oh,
to. But
yeah. Yep.
my mom had a Motown thing, and she also loved the Stones and the Beatles. How did you transition to getting your own feel for music and what you liked versus what was available to you from your parents?
It was AM radio. I think you probably had the same experience when you were a kid. Is I had this tiny little transistor written. It was actually, it was so funny. It looked like a Coca-Cola can. It was a AM radio. Maybe it had FM. I don't know, but it was this little transistor radio that one side of the can was the tuner and had a little volume thing. Oh my God. And just started listening to AM radio. Right. And to the point where I had bought a little cassette player for a couple bucks at a garage sale. And my dad played guitar, we just would strum to John Denver or Jim Croce stuff when I was a kid. And he got himself a little microphone that he plugged into an 8-track tape deck. And I don't believe he could record back then, but maybe he could. And so I stole that thing and plugged it into this little cassette deck that I bought at a garage sale. And you sit there waiting for your favorite song to come on the AM radio and then hit record and then try to capture it and then hope that the DJ didn't talk too much over the beginning, which they always did, and didn't talk too much over at the end. And just started, I was probably in 6th grade making my own mixtapes, just grabbing stuff off the radio. So I think it was radio music at first. What I could find on AM radio was mostly the music. So back then there was a ton of Motown stuff. Certain radio stations you could hear Led Zeppelin and the Stones and the Beatles. And I think that's probably where it came from.
Mhm. So do you remember the first album you ever bought?
Yeah, it was Captain Fantastic and the Brown Deer Cowboy at Corbett's on Central Avenue in Hartsdale, New York. I don't know if I got money for Christmas or I was always cutting somebody's yard or shoveling snow. I would have to have gotten driven over there by my mom, and not sure. It's probably Someone Saved My Life Tonight was the big song on that album for me. It's an all-time favorite of mine. But yeah, that was the very first record. They were records in the house that my parents had. And I would ask them, hey, can you get this particular record? But the first record I actually walked into a store and bought was Elton John, Captain Fantastic.
That's interesting. I wanna come back to that. But so you start buying records. At some point, you transition over to FM radio and more of a rock and roll
Mhm,
vibe. How did that
mhm.
happen? Because Elton John was one of those artists in the '70s that walked the line between being easy listening, adult oriented music and
Yeah.
also being rock and roll. So how did you
for sure.
where did that transition happen for you, and how did that happen?
Probably got a nicer radio. I think that was probably, I think at one of my birthdays, I got what we considered a boombox at the time, which had a cassette, an AM FM tuner. You could carry it around with a handle, and then just started. I remember lying in my bed. God, I'm picturing the bedroom. So it had to have been like seventh or eighth grade, hearing Freebird for the first time on the radio. And I don't think it was the live version. It had to have been the studio version. I don't even know what year I'd be interested to look up what year Freebird was released. And the song just going on.
Right. It was their
It
first
just,
record.
yeah. But the record, it just going on and just something stirring inside me saying, this is the music that I love. All that other stuff, whether even Glenn Campbell, listening to Glenn Campbell and singing along with Glenn Campbell records in the house. All of a sudden I'm listening to, and I think listening to Freebird for the first time, whatever, 11 o'clock at night, pitch black in my room, just having the radio on falling asleep to the radio every night.
Mhm.
And then plunging headfirst into Southern rock back then. That was the Outlaws. Molly Hatchet came along a couple of years later, but it was probably Marshall Tucker Band, the
Mhm.
Outlaws, the Bring It Back Alive live album, the One More From the Road live album, Leonard Skinner. I don't know. I listened to a lot of live albums when I was a kid because it was like a greatest hit, but it was a way that I could also hear the drum parts, right? The drum parts in live recording are typically a little bit more interesting than the studio. I would always go back to studios when I was practicing and I wanted to listen to it, but I loved listening to live drumming.
Mhm. So I did know that Southern rock was your entry point into rock and roll. I believe that leads to your first concert as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. My first concert was the Outlaws and 38 Special at Nassau Coliseum, and it was sometime in 79. So I was 14. I was in eighth grade. It might have been 78 in there, somewhere eighth, ninth grade. I grabbed a ticket from somebody else was supposed to go and they had the extra ticket. And I'm like, yeah, I'll definitely go. And somehow my parents let me go. And it was literally life changing to be on the floor at Nassau Coliseum. I probably didn't know half the music. Probably knew 2 songs from 38 Special at the time, but just the whole experience. I'm like, okay, this is for me.
38 Special, that was really early in their career. That was when the
Yeah.
first 2 records maybe had come out. Seeing the Outlaws and 38 Special back then must have been amazing.
The Outlaws were touring. They had released Bring It Back Alive, the live album, and they were touring on that because Greengrass and High Tide had gotten some traction somehow. Never on radio. It was too long. Unless it was like Freebird, it was 11 o'clock at night and they would play a
Right.
song that long. They would never play anything more than 3 minutes during the day. But after 9 or 10 o'clock at night, you'd hear some of these longer songs.
That and Ghost Riders, and they
Mhm.
had a couple good late night rock and roll DJ needs to go to the bathroom songs that you could turn on and walk out. Yeah,
Oh,
the
for sure.
great stuff. So you get to high school now and you got Southern rock as your thing. How does that music taste progress from there?
It changed drastically. I met probably ninth grade. I met a kid who I'd known. He moved to our town probably when we were in middle school, and he was a piano player. He was a guitar player. He basically any instrument that he would pick up. And I was always in chorus and I was in band. He never played in band. He never played in concert band. He would be invited to play piano during concert, but he didn't play in the band or the orchestra sections. They always asked him to, and he wouldn't. And I never should ask him that someday, but he would always play something acoustic. And he started getting he was listening to more technical music. So he was listening to Yes and Pink Floyd, and he introduced me to Rush. And then we went down some King Crimson. Probably Yes was probably the one that we listened to the most together. And he had big keyboard racks and every kind of couple basses, couple of guitars. And we were in eighth and ninth grade. And he had this whole music room and didn't have a drum set, but we would listen to these records and he would play along with whether it was the synthesizers, the keyboards, the bass lines. And so I transitioned probably in ninth grade from listening to Southern rock kind of nonstop to listening to more progressive pretty much nonstop as well.
that time was interesting, right? The early 80s. Prog rock had
Mhm.
really had its heyday in the 70s, but those
Right.
bands continued on. I mean, King Crimson is going on tour this year. I
Yep.
just saw Genesis's last tour 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It's that music persists. And so
Yep.
for someone who's getting into being a musician, I can see, and for me, it was Zebra and some
Yeah.
other band where, yes,
Yep.
Zebra, where I was like, oh, yeah, that's more than the Beatles. Not that the Beatles are simple or rudimentary,
Yeah.
but they're being more adventurous now than the Beatles, which to me had become like the baseline for all music.
For everything.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Right.
exactly. So listening to Yes, listening to Zebra for me in the early 80s was where I started saying, "Oh yeah, I really want to explore this guitar and what I can do with it." So you've
Yeah.
seen the Outlaws and with 38 Special opening. Do you remember the next concert you saw after that?
It's interesting. There were some I know I went to see James Taylor at that point. The next big show was the first time I saw Rush, which was, Permanent Waves tour 80, 81, something like that. I don't remember
Right.
exactly, but I know I was in ninth grade. I know I went with my friend Tom, who had turned me on to all this music. And I was like, yeah, this is my band. Yeah, I
That's
settled
great.
in because at that point there was 5 albums before that, right? So I got Permanent Waves and listened to Spirit Radio and all the music on there. Again, played that record till it was smooth, but I had this whole collection of music that I could go back to. They had been playing since the early '70s and touring since the early '70s. So there was 6, 7, 8 years of music, um, that I was able to go back and experience and then just count the days and the months till the next time they came around or the next record that they produced, which was Moving Pictures. But yeah, that was the next big show that I remember. There may have been some
Where
other
was that?
smaller shows like that.
Where was
That
the
was at
Rush?
the Rush show was at the Palladium in New York City.
Wow. So
Yeah.
they were still doing clubs in
Yeah.
1980.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Moving Pictures was late 81, and so once Tom Sawyer hit in 82, there was no more clubs for
Nah.
them, then they were an arena band from then on.
Yeah, it was Madison Square Garden. They were playing Brenda Byrne,
Yeah,
Madison Square Garden. They were playing, yeah, indoor
yeah,
arenas at that point.
arena band, and that's the T-shirt you have on now is clearly Rush, and I've always known that you are a massive Rush fan, which is beautiful. So, they're the band I assume you've seen the most times?
Yeah, I saw Rush. I figured out it's 23 times.
23, that's good. I've seen them
23
twice.
times.
It's a lot more.
Yeah. And the last show was probably the greatest live show I ever saw, just because it was the last time I saw them was June 29th of 2015 at what it was the new Boston Garden. I guess it's the TD Garden.
Garden. Yeah, I just saw a show there last year. I saw Greta
Yeah.
Van Fleet, who you like, who
Yep.
you turned me on
Yep.
to.
Yep.
So you've seen Rush the most, and that's maybe the best show, and also the last time that you got to see Neil play. If
Yeah.
Rush reformed with another drummer, would you go see him?
I would, without hesitation. I would just add a little asterisk to say it depends on the drummer, but I wouldn't not see them. If they toured with Tommy Lee from Motley Crue, I would still go see them. I wouldn't be happy, but I would still go see them.
When they did the Taylor Hawkins benefit shows, they played
Yeah,
with Omar Hakim, they played with Chad
yeah,
Smith, right? Danny Carey played with them. So I bet they could get pretty much anyone to go play a short tour with them.
yeah, yeah. Should be Mike Portnoy. That's who should play.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yes.
Yeah, that's who should play. Gavin Harrison would be great from Porcupine Tree, but it should be Portnoy. That's who should Miko maybe or Nico from Iron
Iron
Maiden.
Man. Yeah.
Somebody that plays a big set. Taylor Hawkins could have done it, but we lost another great drummer and a great music personality too with him.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to see Danny Carey do it. I thought Danny
Yep.
Carey of
Yep.
all those, and honestly, I thought Omar Hakim was amazing playing with them.
Yeah, he was. Yep.
It's
Yep.
definitely a
For sure.
different vibe that he comes from, but I thought he played great with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Any of those guys would be fantastic.
Yeah, it would be fun. I hope they do it. There's some rumors that they're starting to talk about it again. I hope they do it. All right, let's juxtapose that with Your most recent concert, what's the last show you saw?
Last week, I saw the Steve Morse Band and the Dregs, two of Steve Morse's bands, right? There were three. The Dixie Dregs was the first rendition of that band, and they shortened it just to the Dregs. And Steve Morse has had the Steve Morse Band and also Steve Morse Band. So there's four different iterations of this group. When Steve Morse plays, he plays with a bass player by the name of Dave LaRue, and he plays with a European drummer named Van Romain. So they played that threesome played, and then they took an intermission, and then Steve Morse comes back out with the original members of the Dregs, which is a bass player whose name is skipping my mind, and they'll come back to me. A violinist who's also an anesthesiologist. So it's Dr. Sloan. He's just virtual, so
Paging Dr.
crazy.
Sloan to the stage.
Yeah, exactly. And one of my all-time favorite drummers, Rod Morgenstein, and Jordan Rudess played keyboards from Dream Theater and Liquid Tension Experiment. So yeah, went and traveled to Durham, North Carolina to see the show last week with my buddy Tom, and it was a fantastic show.
I've never seen Steve Morse. I almost saw him. Didn't he play with Deep Purple for quite a while as well?
Yeah, he did about 8 years with Deep Purple.
Yeah, I almost saw them on one of those shows, and at the last minute, I couldn't go, but I was really looking forward to it. I have one of the Steve Morse solo records, and I've always just loved it.
Yeah.
And then I love the Dregs, although they were proggy metal before that was a thing.
They were. Yep. It's funny when you look at iTunes, and I've been listening to them, knowing that I was going to see the show. They got their way back up into the top of my playlist. And the first couple albums were listed as jazz fusion. And then some of the later stuff was classified as rock and roll. I know some of the Steve Morse Band stuff is real twangy Southern rock, almost hillbilly bluegrass stuff too. And then he's Scottish descent. So he'll play a lot of stuff that's more English sounding or Scottish sounding, Irish, almost jig music. Such a diverse catalog that he has. And yeah, he's been fighting with some arthritis. So the impetus for me to drive the 8 hours both ways to see this show was the fact that hopefully he'll keep going. And he played lights out. I saw no deterioration in his playing, but I've heard he's struggling with his hands right now.
Oh, that's terrible. But again, a great reason to go see him.
Yeah, for sure. He's a lefty. I just learned that last time. He's a lefty, and he plays righty, and he's always played righty. And he felt his stronger hand on the fretboard. So he's a lefty. So he wanted the more dexterity on the fretboard than with the pick.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm right-handed and I play right-handed, and I don't understand why, because you do need more dexterity to finger complex pieces anyway. To play chords,
Correct.
It's not all that hard. And rhythm, I guess the reason that right-handers play the way we do is because that's where you keep the rhythm, is in your right hand. And that's should be, I would assume, done with your dominant hand, but it never made sense to me. Never.
Yep. And Rod Morgenstein is a lefty, and his first probably 15 or 20 years of playing live, and when he was a kid, they forced him to play a right-handed set. So it forced him to really be able to develop his non-dominant hand, because as a drummer, we do much more with our dominant hand, and the left hand is following, trailing, keeping the beat. And about 10 years ago, he shifted to a lefty set. So yeah, when we saw him last week, he was playing a full lefty set. And that was one of the things we were kind of talking about during the intermission. I'm like, is he going to, and we couldn't tell from the set looking at it on stage, whether it was going to be a lefty set or a righty set.
That is interesting. I've never heard of a drummer changing orientation halfway through their career. All right. You covered your most memorable concert just being the last time you saw Rush. Any other concerts in your history that have stood out?
Yeah, I have to say the concert, aside from the Rush concerts, because it's redundant, I would have to say going to see Diver Down November of 82 was the first date with my wife. Because she was 14. And somehow our parents let me drive to the Brendan Byrne Arena to see Van Halen concert.
Yeah, that was a good tour. I really like that tour.
The original dates were early October. and I was supposed to take another girl. The two Brendan Byrne shows and the Nassau College CM show were canceled because Eddie did something to his thumb or one of his finger, and so he couldn't play. So there were a bunch of rescheduled shows from that tour, and so they pushed it to the middle of November, and I had broken up with that girl and had started dating my wife. Or again, what going out when you're in high school. We ate lunch together, that basically, and I drove her home from play practice at night. That was going out back then. We went
I
to
remember.
repeat.
I remember it well. But that, if
So,
you're going to go on a first date, that's a pretty good one. That tour was good. I didn't
yep,
love the Diver Down record, but they were as good a live act in 1982
yeah,
as any rock
yep,
band ever has been. They were
yep.
really at the prime of their power.
Dave was at his peak. Eddie was running all over the stage. It was a great.
Oh. Have you ever seen a concert where you were disappointed, where you went in with big expectations and you walked out saying, that wasn't so great?
I don't know whether I had high expectations, but I went to see Hootie and the Blowfish, Joe and Feach, and I almost left. And I liked some of that music. It wasn't really my genre. It was really poppy and stuff like that, but it was good stuff. And I thought he had a good voice, and they were huge for a few years. They were the biggest band in the world for a few years. Huge. And they were awful.
That's exactly how I envisioned the question being answered. So, is there an act you've seen other than Rush that you consider the best live act? Because there's a difference between your favorite
Yeah,
band, the
for
best
sure.
recording band, and the best
Mhm.
live act. Do you have a live act you walked away from just saying, "Wow, they are so great live"?
I do, and it may surprise you. One of my favorite shows ever that I think about was, and maybe just because I wasn't expecting much. I was a peripheral fan to this band. I liked some of their stuff. Never really, and this is probably blasphemy for anybody that likes them. I never loved the lead singer's voice. I loved the musicianship. I loved the music. I loved the songs, and again, got invited. Somebody had a ticket to go see Iron Maiden at the New Haven Coliseum. And it was in college, it was probably freshman or sophomore year in college. And another buddy that became a concert buddy of mine, still is today, said, let's go see Iron Maiden. I was like, sure, I'll go see Iron Maiden. And and we were sitting pretty close. So that always helps to be in the first 10 or 20 rows of any show versus seeing the same show from, I could touch the ceiling from when I saw Diver Down. But to see a show like that was so theatrical, and just the pyrotechnics, and just they built a pirate ship on the stage, and they have the giant monster comes out, and I had never seen anything that big, and it was a spectacle. So of all the live shows, and I've seen a ton of really good live shows and very talented musicians. I've seen bands where I just sit in my seat and just are in awe of guitarists and drummers. This was incredible. So I'll say it was, it might have been 2 Minutes to Midnight tour. I don't remember what album that was on, but I think that was, if Iron Maiden had a single, it was probably 2 Minutes to Midnight. So I'm not sure what tour it was.
Got it. Now that syncs up well for me because when I met you, we're fraternity brothers as well. Your nickname was
Here
Marvin
it comes.
Metalhead.
Yeah,
And so talking with you today and in the past, getting to know more about you than I did when I first met you, I was always fascinated to hear that it started with Elton John and then it got into Leonard Skinner and the Outlaws, and then it got into prog rock before you actually got to your metal phase that gave you
for
that
sure.
nickname. But though I have to feel that we went to our fraternity was filled with a lot of waspy guys for whom any hard
Hmm.
rock would be considered heavy metal. So that was an
Yeah.
easy tag to put on you without it actually being a full representation of your musical tastes. How did you
Yeah.
get that nickname?
Freshman year, I went through my first Led Zeppelin phase. I had always
Freshman year
liked the
of
music.
college.
Freshman year of college. I don't know why. I mean, it was always around, and there were songs here and there that I loved, but I never spent a lot of time. I didn't own my first Zeppelin album until I got to college, which is, I don't know, maybe attributed to Southern rock stuff and then prog rock stuff. And then kind of circling back, I wasn't crazy about the Rush stuff that came out after Signals. I wasn't a big fan of Power Windows and Presto and some of the stuff where they started getting, kind of flock of seagulls on me. My power trio, my Who and Zeppelin-ish power trio from Canada with the greatest drummer that ever walked the earth, in my opinion, started playing like Thomas Dolby shit. I moved on and so I went through a big Led Zeppelin phase. And then I believe from Led Zeppelin, I think that led into and at the same time, I guess, I'd listened to AC/DC, obviously Back in Black. I think, how old were we what year did Back in Black come out?
It came out in 1980.
82?
No, 80. Yep.
Okay.
Bon Scott died after Highway to Hell in 79.
So I listened to that. I was aware of it in high school. Wasn't a lot of room there. And then this Zeppelin kind of leading me to English hard rock band. Never went deep into Motorhead or that kind of stuff, but just played all the Zeppelin records smooth. Went through a Who phase for a while, went through an AC/DC phase. That was really in college that I started, I don't know, just wanting to piss off my neighbors who were all listening to the Grateful Dead. I had a gigantic Iron Maiden poster in my dorm room. It was perfect for University of Vermont.
That is great. Yeah, I don't recall seeing anyone having that poster in my freshman year dorm.
Yeah.
No Eddie posters, no Killers poster, no nothing. Have you ever discovered a band after only seeing them live? I went to see a number of bands where I got there early and saw the opening act, and usually it was like, not so great. But I did go
Yeah.
see the Scorpions in 1984, and Bon Jovi was opening, and I had never heard of them, ever. And I was like,
Wow.
"Oh, they're pretty good."
Yeah.
So that's the idea of the question. Have you ever discovered a band seeing them as an opening act, never having heard of them before?
There were here and there was a band out of Southern California named Riot that had an album called Guns and Tequila. They opened for Rush and they were great. I went to see Rat and Poison opened. Had never heard of them. They had been a club band in Los Angeles. So I never really got into Poison. I listened to them just like the rest of us did. I don't think I ever bought a record, but that was an interesting, these guys are really good and they're young.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different than what we've heard before. And they're great guitarist. Most recently, there was an opening act for Greta Van Fleet by the name of Crownland. And it's two guys. And it's the drummer, vocalist, and then another guy that plays everything else. And the quote that I heard was, if you had taken two guys and put them in a room full of instruments for 15 years with nothing to listen to but all the Rush albums from Moving Pictures backwards, this is the band that would come out on the other side. So they are, yeah, pretty good. But they probably only have 15 or 20 songs out. I'm waiting for them to do something different, or at least to come out with some new music. But yeah. So yeah, I've had some fun surprises over the years. I wish I was the guy that could say that they went to see, a band and Pearl Jam was the opener and nobody ever heard of them when they saw them at the Beacon Theater or something like that.
I don't have that many good stories, and they're all from the 80s for sure. Seeing
Yeah.
Bon Jovi was definitely the biggest one of them, though. All right, looking at venues that you've gone to, do you have a favorite venue that you've been to?
I do like the Capitol Theater in Port Chester, New York, just because you can either sit or you can stand. I like moving around at concerts. I don't necessarily like just sitting still. I did like Town Hall where we went recently. I like the Beacon. I like those kind of theater type places. I would say a place like BB's or maybe the Iridium, some of those clubby type places are fun as well. Mostly smaller venues. My favorites are the smaller venues. I go see stadium shows, but I don't like them. I think for the most part, the sound is terrible. I prefer small venues. Is that typical?
It's interesting. I feel the exact same way. The interesting observation that I've realized more doing this podcast is that the bands that people like you and I tend to like are no longer club bands. And so you can't see them in a club. So you end up spending a
Right.
lot more time in arenas and stadiums. But
Yep.
going to see a show in a club is far preferential. Having
Yeah.
said that, I just released a concert review this past week for the podcast of seeing Bruce up in
Hmm.
Syracuse. And
Right.
I was close enough in a 70,000 seat indoor football stadium. I was close enough that I didn't have to watch the screens the whole time to enjoy the
Okay.
show.
Okay.
And that changed it for me for a big
Okay.
stadium show. So I really got to enjoy it in a different way. But I agree with you 100% that if you were to ask me that question, the answer would be the Beacon Theater. It's the best combination for
Yeah.
me of size. It's 4,000 seats, I think, and
Yeah.
sound quality. And every seat's a good seat. You can see from almost anywhere. They don't
Yeah.
use screens, so you don't need screens. But the sound quality is exceptional, and you can see all different kinds of bands there. But the reality is that I've seen the majority of the shows that I've ever seen by a long margin at the Garden. I've seen 50
Yeah.
something shows at the Garden out of the 200 and something shows that I've seen. And I've seen, I don't know, 6 Beacon shows, 8 Beacon shows, maybe 10 total
Yeah.
at the Beacon.
Yep.
And those clubs in New York are so fun to go to, but you have to work at it to find a band that you're going to love. Like I saw a band called the London Souls downtown in New York, and that was a great show. So just fewer and further between, but most of the bands that we like are arena rock bands, and either they're
Absolutely.
playing arenas or they're so big. Like I'm going to see the Stones at the end of the month. They don't even do arenas anymore. They only do stadiums.
Yeah, it's
So
all just stadiums. Yeah.
yeah, so it's crazy. But do you have a place that you've seen the most shows at?
It's the Garden by far.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Madison Square Garden by far. Seen a handful of shows at Jones Beach, a bunch of shows at Nassau Coliseum, bunch at the old Brendan Byrne Arena, Giant Stadium, which is now MetLife Stadium. Those are probably just being from New York, and those are the venues that were available to us. But yeah, by far, Madison Square Garden.
Do you have a least favorite?
Yeah. I would say my least favorite venues are that you can't see a show there anymore, but the old Brendan Byrne Arena, which is just a big concrete, room, just the work, unless you were on the floor in front of the speakers. I always thought the sound was just bouncing all over the place, echoey and bad. Yeah. Any indoor concrete arena that's a basketball court or a hockey rink that's been turned into somehow they do a good job at the Garden, I think is probably the soft seats and the ceiling and the fact that it's a little bit more round than it is rectangle.
Yeah, I think the ceiling there really makes a huge difference because it's not a concrete
Yeah.
ceiling. It's all those cables are hung and there's soft spots above it. Yeah, I never loved the Brendan Byrne Arena, but I saw so many good shows there that I never
I know,
really.
me too.
There are places in the city like Terminal 5 I really don't like. That is like
Yeah.
there's small clubs that have really like Irving Plaza. They
Yeah.
redid it, made the sound. It's so overwhelmingly loud that it's not cool rock and roll loud. It's devastatingly
Yeah.
deafening loud. Oh, not for
Do,
me.
do you remember the summer concert series? I think it was the Miller concert series
On the
on the
pier?
piers. Yeah,
Yeah.
on the off the West Side Highway. I saw Huey Lewis and the News there. That was a great show.
NEW
Huey
used to
Lewis,
sponsor all those concerts.
and that's right. It was NEW. Yep,
Yeah.
100%. Got Muni.
Oh, good. Scott Muni
Got
and yeah,
Muni.
Richard Neer and all those guys. It was great. Pat
Yeah.
St. John. Thinking about recorded live music, do you have a favorite live album? You said you used to listen to a lot of live albums, so this one's right up your alley.
It has to be All the World's a Stage, the first Rush live album that came out right after 2112. That's yeah. There's not a second of that album that doesn't give me chills.
Do you still listen to it?
All right.
Yeah.
Greatest drum solo ever recorded. Absolutely
Which one?
greatest drum solo ever. It's the Working Man drum solo where Geddy announces Neil as the first time ever. It was the first time they ever referred to him as the professor on the drum kit. Changed my life.
Listen to that again. Yeah, cool.
Changed my life, man.
And change your life.
I don't know. Just the music affected me. I can't really say just that he could do what he was doing. No, I never heard anything like it. I like listening to Eruption the first time you ever heard, or anything from Van Halen 1. And you just listen to that. I try to explain that to my kids. I'm like, nobody had ever done anything like that. Now everybody does it, including his kid, but I had never heard anything like what Neil was able to do in that drum solo. It was otherworldly. He's incredible.
Yeah. How about concert films? Because that was big for our generation. I've talked to younger people who blank when I say concert film because it doesn't resonate with them at all. But for us, I had to explain to someone recently, before MTV, there was no way to see your
Yeah.
favorite bands.
No,
I had no idea what most of my favorite bands looked like other than what was on the
correct.
pictures on the covers of their records. So
Yeah.
seeing The Song Remains the Same, The Last
Yeah.
Waltz, those things were massive things for me when I
Yeah.
was young.
For
How about
sure.
you?
I totally agree with you. We have only the pictures on the inside of the records, and not all the bands would put pictures in. There would be lyrics or something like that. That's why we would go to the record stores and buy the concert posters to have Robert Plant or any picture of Rush. That's how we saw, aside from going to the shows, there was no videos. So I think Song Remains the Same probably is the one. I don't know if I consider The Wall concert film, but I would say Song Remains the Same because of the concert footage that there's a lot of other stuff in that, but to be able to see John Bonham play and they're like 20, they were so young,
Yeah.
but yeah, that would be it.
Have you ever met any of musicians at a show, especially?
I met Jordan Rudess. That's probably the only one. He played the Tarrytown Music Hall and I paid to have after the show backstage. And it was like a month and a half after Portnoy had left Dream Theater. So we had lots of questions and he cut everybody short. The first thing he said when he walked out on stage, he welcomed he played a song. And then after the first song, he said, look, he goes, I don't know what happened. I don't know who's next. And that's all I have to say about that. So he nipped it in the butt pretty quick and played a great show. But yeah, he was really young, really very down to earth. My friend Tom, who went to Berkeley, the guy that I keep referring to, he went to Berkeley for a couple of years and he was there at the same time Rudess was there and Mike Portnoy was there and Petrucci was there. He knew them just as guys that he went to school with, but didn't know them better than that. But yeah, Jordan Rudess was the only one who I've really met. Unfortunately.
Yeah, but he was nice, so that's good.
Yeah, not unfortunately with him. It was unfortunate that I haven't met more of my idols.
Sometimes I think it's better not to.
Yeah, possibly.
I've met a lot of my idols, and most of them I said as little as possible and then got out of there. I didn't wanna have the illusion ruined for me,
Yeah, that's a good point.
you know? Although Bruce was very nice to me for the 1 second that he talked to me. Very nice.
Nice, nice. That's
And
awesome.
I was 11, so that changed my life. There you go.
Yeah, I bet. Oh yeah.
Thinking about bucket list stuff, if there's a concert venue out there that you haven't been to that you'd like to see a show at, where would that be?
Two come to mind. I'd like to see, and they're very different. And my reasonings for going is different. I want to go to Red Rocks in Denver. Seen enough footage and concert films. Rush played there and filmed some stuff. Obviously, that became famous with U2. There, that film, that video. So just picturesque and sunset and a really cool outdoor venue. That would be the one. I want to go to Royal Albert Hall. Thought about Wembley, another big stadium. I'd have to be close. But yeah, probably Royal Albert Hall is definitely on my bucket list. So those two, one indoor, one outdoor. How
Well,
about
I
you?
have to say, yeah, Red Rocks is by far the number one answer on this show so far.
Yeah.
Literally everyone except one person who had already been there, so it wasn't on the bucket list for him anymore. So for me, it's Red Rocks and the Ryman in Nashville. I'd love to go see
Okay.
anybody play at the Ryman, but Royal Albert Hall is a great one that I never really thought of until very recently, and thought maybe that'd be a good answer too, because there have been so many
Yeah.
classic shows there.
Exactly. Yep.
Really good. And I'd love to go to the Cavern Club and
Mhm.
see what that's all about. I'm who
Yeah.
knows if it'd
Exactly.
be any good,
Yeah.
but I'd love to see it even as a tourist, not for a show. I'd just love to go look.
Yeah.
If you could see anyone perform, living or dead, that you've never seen, who would it be?
That's tough. I'm gonna say Stevie Ray. I missed him. Never saw him. They played the Memorial Auditorium in Burlington, and I knew like two, three guys that went. I don't know if I was working that night, but I didn't go, thinking there would be time. And then he disappeared for a while he was getting this shit together, and then he passed away. So anytime he shows up in my Instagram feed, because it's guitarist when I flip, I will freeze anytime there's a close up of Stevie Ray playing almost any show, any song. Yeah, that's the one that always
Agreed.
comes to the top of my mind. I love watching virtuoso guitarists. I love my drummers, but that's why I love Steve Morse. I just sit there and watch him pick and play just the most diverse songs. Yeah, I would Stevie Ray, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to say
that's
Elvis,
solid.
or I would certainly would love to see Zeppelin in their heyday, but realistically, I think it would probably still be Stevie.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much my answer as well. And I the same exact experience up in college, sitting there
Hmm.
thinking, "Oh, I'll get to see him once I'm back in New
Yeah,
York. I'll go see him sometime."
yeah,
And then he passed away. I remember exactly that's one of the few moments in my life I know exactly where I was and how
yeah, me
I
too.
remember how I felt when I heard over the radio that he had just passed away.
Yeah.
That was a shocker.
Where were you?
I was in the driveway of my apartment. I was pulling out of the driveway of my apartment that I was living in up for the summer, going to pick up my roommate who was flying in from Minneapolis to start the school year because it was on
Mm,
August 25th, I think he passed away. August
yep,
24th, one or the other. But I think it was the
yep.
25th. Or he passed away the night of the 24th. I don't remember the date. It's one of those two dates. But I remember I was
Hmm.
backing out of the driveway to go to the Burlington International Airport to pick up my roommate for the year, my friend Steve. And he
Yeah,
was flying in from Minneapolis. And I heard the news and I literally almost ran into a car backing out
yeah,
because I was
yeah.
so shocked.
I had graduated. So you were still in school. I had graduated and I was with Christine, and Glenn had an aunt who had a house. They had a house on the North Shore of Long Island, way out at a place called Mattatock. And I had just bought my first Jeep Wrangler, and it was August, as you said, and it was hotter at blazes. And Glenn had convinced me that I needed to take the top off, the hard top off the Jeep, because we were going to take a ferry we weren't going to Block Island, but there's another place you could take a ferry to. And it was
Shelter
gorgeous. So
Island.
I was on my way to a Jeep dealership on the North Fork of Long Island when I heard the news and had to pull over, to the side of the road and was bawling. Like that didn't happen. No, it was just complete. I remember how I felt.
Mm,
Yeah, it was crazy.
yeah. Terrible, especially because he had done all that work to clean up and to get his
Yeah.
act together. And
Yep. I don't know. If I'm a famous rock star, I'm never getting into a helicopter. I don't care. Small airplanes and helicopters, man.
they have enough
Yeah.
lessons as to why you don't do that. There are enough examples.
Yeah.
Ay, ay, ay. All right, looking forward. Do you have any tickets for concerts coming up?
I do. I'm going to see Alanis Morissette in Toronto in July. That's my next show on my
Okay.
wife's
How did
birthday. Or
Oh, cool. Why Toronto?
again, somebody bought tickets and said, "You want to go see Alanis Morissette?" And I'm like, "When?" And they're like, "July, whatever it is, 13th, 12th, 11th, something like that." And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like a nice birthday weekend for my wife. I'll take two." And that's it.
Love it. Do you have any other shows you wanna go see this year that you may or may not have tickets for yet?
I really want to go see Wolf Van Halen. I've been obsessing over his two records that he recorded himself and played every single instrument. It's just been on constant replay for a couple of weeks. I think he's incredibly talented and he's a better drummer than most drummers. And he's not a drummer. He is a drummer, but the fact that he can
Right.
play everything and layer it all in, and it's very good. It's very technical. It's got some proggy feel to it. It doesn't sound like Van Halen to me. He will pay homage to his dad every once in a while with a riff here and there that true Van Halen fans will hear, but it's his own music. Have you had a chance to spend any time with it?
Yeah, you're talking about Mammoth WVH. I
Yeah,
have both records downloaded. I've been listening for a couple months now to the first
yeah,
record, and then the second record came out, and I got that and started listening to that. I haven't listened to the newer one as often, but he
yeah.
is opening for Foo Fighters, and I do have tickets. With that, I leave it to you. Anything else that I didn't ask about that you think might be interesting for the folks to listen to? Can you tell me what the most outrageous experience you ever had at a concert was? Because I know there's one.
Yeah, it has to be the first time I got close to a mosh pit, like a mosh pit where I was physically scared. And I was probably 22 when it happened. So we're talking 87, 88. I was in college and I went to see the Monsters of Rock tour at Dover Motor Speedway in Dover, New Hampshire. It was pouring, absolutely pouring that day. And the lineup was like a greatest hits of my life, except for the first act, which they weren't bad, but it was Kingdom Come, Dokken, Scorpion, Van Halen, and Metallica.
Right.
Now, at the time, the order of the show was Kingdom Come. I want to say it was then Metallica, then the Scorpion. I'm
Before
sorry. No, no,
Doc
no. It's
no, Dokken.
100%. It was Kingdom Come, Dokken, Metallica, Scorpion, Van Halen was the close. And it was Injustice for All tour for Metallica. And I had listened to Masters of Puppets. I had done it. That stuff was actually even a little bit too hard for me when I first heard that stuff. And people would just look at you and what is that? Right. So I knew it was out there, but I put that in the same genre as like Motorhead and some of the really harder stuff that I didn't love. So they changed. Dokken leaves the stage. It's a half an hour for them to set up, and people are starting to, and everybody's muddy, everybody's wet already, and we're standing out in the rain waiting for the next act. And I knew who it was, and I knew their reputation. But then once they started playing, and people started just rushing, and it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And we stayed in for a couple of songs, and we just started getting. You're like this. Some people are coming out bloodied. Um, so we backed away and just watched. I'd heard about mosh pits, but I'd never seen any of it in person. So yeah, it was a great show. It was a great show. Um, Metallica should have closed. They should have been the closing act. And it was Sammy. It wasn't Dave at that point.
Right, that's what I always found funny about that tour, and the reason I didn't go was because I didn't like Van Hagar. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't think they were a hard rock band anymore. They were like a pop band.
No.
They were a
Yeah, for
synth
sure.
band, like Rush during that same period of time. They made a
Yeah.
transition and they wrote
Yeah.
pop songs, and that's not bad or
Yeah.
good. They're very catchy, and I still listen to them now and think, "Oh, I remember, how fun it was to be
Yeah.
in college and listening to this."
Yeah.
But it wasn't something you go see with Scorpions and Dokken and
No
Metallica. Just
point.
a mismatched band. And what's
Yeah.
interesting is that they took most of those bands to Russia the next year, but they took Ozzy, and instead of Metallica, they took Ozzy, and instead of Van Halen, they took Bon Jovi. And I think Motley Crue went too, and they all went to Russia, but it was a Monsters of Rock kind of
Yeah.
thing too. That would have been more interesting to me. That was just a weird mismatched lineup. But the other thing to think about that you bring up is that before the Black Album, Metallica was like much more aggressive. They were an aggressive
Yeah.
band, and their fans were super aggressive
Yeah.
until they opened up with the Black Album and they brought in a whole new audience of more mainstream rock fans who weren't so down for walking out with no teeth and having to go to the hospital just to
Yeah.
go
Well,
see your favorite band.
my understanding was that Cliff was their original bass player who had passed away in the bus crash, was so dominant in terms of their songwriting that when Jason came in, he wasn't really songwriting. He was just hanging on for dear life, trying to learn everything that they were doing. But I think the other guys started taking over the songwriting, and it got a little bit more mainstream acceptable. And it was Injustice for All tour, or that album, which was, I thought, was when the music started shifting to things that were more palatable to playing at a frat party, as opposed to trying to play Masters of Puppets and just the girls are running out the door. Like, what, this is not the party I wanted to go to.
With that, Rod, thank you so much for your time. I love taking that journey with you. Before we go, at the very beginning, you mentioned that your real entrance to rock and roll was Elton John. Have you ever seen Elton live?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've seen Elton 4 or 5 times, and I think every time was at the Garden, because he would he would come back to the Garden. It's like Billy Joel. He didn't take up residency, but whenever he plays New York, he plays the Garden. I actually saw him at Radio City too. I've seen him at Radio City, which we haven't talked about, which is interesting. It doesn't really come up as a favorite venue, but it's a great place to see a show if you want to sit.
I saw Iron Maiden there.
There you go.
That's the only time I've ever seen Iron Maiden. I've also seen Phil Collins there, The Pretenders, Madonna. I saw Madonna on her first headlining tour. She played
Oh my
there. I saw
God.
that. But yeah, Radio City's a weird one because you do feel like you have to sit down the whole time.
Yep,
Can't get
for
wild.
sure.
Anyway, Rod, thanks. This has been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in person very soon and going to a show
Yep.
with you this year, hopefully. And I appreciate your time today. And with that, I'll thank everyone for joining us. We'll be back next Tuesday. And if you like what you heard today, we'd appreciate it if you would like and subscribe or follow to make sure you get notified about every new episode. And please tell your friends. Additionally, we want to know what you think. So please leave us a comment and we'll try to respond to every one of them. The Rock and Roll Show podcast is a World Highway Media production. I'm your host, Alex Gadd. And until next time, I want to remind you that life is short, so get those concert tickets.